Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Ian Castledine. I'm one of the solution architects for RM Results, and I'm the one thing, well, I think there's two things, getting in the way of coffee. So for the next half hour, we're going to just explore something of how technology can address some of the challenges and opportunities in assessment. And I think a lot of what we're going to pick on is going to build on what Shamit's been talking about. And I think we'll start to see some common themes running through the presentations today. It's great to have Adam Burt joining me as well. So Adam's going to just share a little bit later on about how ICAW, that's the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, about how they have seen some changes in how they go about assessment and how technology has helped to address some particular opportunities that they've had in moving from paper testing through to on screen. My first memory of technology and assessment is probably a negative one, really. It's that I wasn't allowed to go and use my calculator in my maths exam. Fortunately, in some sectors at least, things have moved on some way since that time, although interestingly, 26 years on, my daughter, who's currently going through preparations for GCSEs, I think is facing some of the same challenges that I did, and maybe we'll pick up on some of that in a moment. And the way that we're going to just structure this slide is, first of all, just to think about some of the changing landscape of assessment, actually, and the changing landscape of learning, maybe more to the point. And then thinking about how technology can help to address some of those, some of the challenges, but also some of the opportunities that changing landscape presents us with. And I'm going to pick out 5 particular areas to focus on. To be frank, we're probably just skimming the surface. What I'm hoping is that we just leave you with some ideas and thoughts that might help to spark some conversation in the round table slot that we have after the break. So, what is this changing landscape that I talk about? Well, in many areas, we're very familiar with the bit at the top, the very linear approach to learning and assessment, that there's a beginning, there's a load of stuff that happens in a pretty set order, and then there's a finish. And to be frank, our general qualification space in the UK is really struggling to move on from that space, I'm sure we recognise. But actually, in many ways, the dynamic around learning is changed into a much more dynamic, much more agile one, represented at the bottom, where we've still got a beginning and we've still got an end, but the processes in the middle are much more dynamic, much more agile, much more collaborative, with the opportunity of changing minds, changing direction, doing different things, gathering evidence, and all of that becomes more part of how I'm learning and experiencing and growing and ultimately being assessed. In some sectors, there's clearly a nervousness around almost anything that's moving away from the top model. To be frank, there's probably a nervousness about anything that really embeds technology and uses technology. But in other spaces, clearly there's much more acceptance of and recognition of changing landscape and how technology in all its guises can help address some of those challenges. So just thinking about some of those in a little detail, and I'm really going to just throw some ideas, thoughts. Some of these may be familiar to you, others may not. Some of these build on the work of AI, machine learning, others don't. They're more sort of traditional technology based, if you will. But first of all, just thinking about flexibility, because one of the challenges of a more dynamic approach to assessment is how do our conventional models of test delivery, how do they respond to that challenge? What's shown on the screen are a couple of examples. The first one, up in the top right-hand side, is a principle about, well, rather than having to go to a fixed test centre to be assessed, then can we break down that physical barrier and instead be more agile about how we're able to provide testing services? This is representing something that we've maybe talking about for a while around test center in a box. The principle that you package all of the things that you need to deliver a test session into a self-contained unit, take it somewhere, so you're bringing the test center to the students. Maybe that doesn't make as much sense in the UK, where we're pretty close together. It's pretty easy for candidates to get to a major city if necessary to be tested. But in different areas around the world, this sort of idea can help to transform how we think about how tests are delivered. The thing that underpins that is loading tests up onto just a little server in a box, little test center in a box that can be battery powered, hooked up to a load of tablet computers that are battery powered, so there's no dependency on power, on internet connection. But we can still deliver tests in an efficient and in a secure way, just away from all of that infrastructure. It's quite an interesting model, and it's worth thinking about how some of the challenges that maybe you're faced in your particular organisation you're being held back by physical constraints that could be addressed in different ways. The other example in the bottom is this is a Kiosk Pc, and we're working with partners on a number of different projects at the moment. And the idea with this is that this is a device that could be installed in a library, for example, or in some sort of public space, where the students are able to go to take tests. And in this thing, there's some webcams built in, some cameras. So monitoring what the student is doing and also monitoring what's going on in the environment. That's quite interesting then to start thinking about how that could tie up with elements such as remote proctoring solution. The idea that rather than having somebody physically in a room monitoring what I'm doing when I'm taking my test, that's replaced by different technology-based solution. It might be that there's still a person sat at the other end of the wire monitoring things remotely. It might be that this is recording for sessions to be played back in the future, just to be looking at possible malpractice. Some really interesting ideas there, particularly when you hook that up to AI potential, where machines are able to to spot potential malpractice, to let others then go and investigate that and determine if there is something dodgy going on. Some interesting things there as to how to provide more flexible approaches to assessment delivery, assessment of on-screen tests in this case. I mention malpractice because this is an image that you might recognise that was doing the rounds was it last year or a year before from the Bihar state in India. You don't normally see exam malpractice quite as visibly as this, with parents and family members scrambling around buildings trying to pass notes to students inside who are taking tests. Malpractice isn't normally quite as easy to spot, but in looking at different models of test delivery, we have to be aware of the need to ensure that first of all, students are getting the results that they deserve, but secondly, that your brands are protected and the integrity of the exams and the integrity of the assessments are protected. And going back to that example I gave just now of the Kiosk Pc and looking at remote proctoring type solutions, that was really nicely when hooked up to some sort of identity tracking type technology. One of the things that I didn't dwell on the first slide was a reader at the bottom of this thing, which would read a passport, for example. But other examples have it so that the candidate has to hold an identifier up in front of the camera. And then technology is already available to start doing recognition to determine if two images are the same. So is the person who sat in front of a PC taking the exam the same person who is on the identity card or the passport or whatever it is to start with? One of the nice things that's built into the Kiosk Pc that I showed you just now is that you can't fool it by just putting another image in front of a webcam to try and pretend that you brought your own somebody's holiday snaps of their photo. And so actually it's a different person who's sat in front of a PC. It will do things such as looking for eye movement and make sure that the image that it's looking at to compare against the identity card is actually a real person. That's quite clever. But what's shown on here is, this is just a public API. This is actually part of the Azure media services set, but people like Google and Microsoft, Amazon, are all developing this type of technology. And what's underpinning all of this is the stuff that we're talking about just now around machine learning, around just starting to make better judgments of information, better management of information. Okay, that's very interesting. You could see how that could be quite handy about tagging your holiday photos. But how could you tie that into assessment? Well, first of all, maybe around checking the identity of candidates at the start of assessment. This is something that we've mocked up just to think about how that might work in the future. And what this is showing is the image that was captured off the candidate's identity card when they registered for the exam, or maybe when they checked in. And then during the test session, at random points, a webcam has just been recording who sat there. Now, okay, I think the character here, he looks a bit dodgy to start with, but the idea here is that you can see maybe on the screen that has been flagged as red, whereas the rest of these are green. And what that's trying to show is that through that sort of facial recognition technology, it's flagged up here that there might be something dodgy going on that needs investigating. Now that's the sort of thing that you could maybe flag up on the fly. It might be that tests are being delivered in areas where test centres aren't maybe quite as robust in their practices as you'd hope. And so using technology such as this, you could use that as a way of starting to enforce some of your own policies and making sure that exams are being delivered well in all regions. So you can't buy that today, but the technology that underpins that is developing by the day and is only going to get more and more accurate in being able to pick up that sort of thing. So we looked at flexibility in assessment, looked at some areas of trust and integrity in assessment. The next area I just want to pick up is around efficiency of assessment. So how can technology help support improved efficiency? It's been said to me of late that moving into e-assessment from the outset isn't necessarily about cost reductions, but in the longer term, it can enable a reduction in the delivery of assessment, both through more efficient use of test centres, more efficient use of items, and the whole life cycle of that assessment process. Whenever I talk about adaptive testing, I tend to just put a Thornton selection box on the screen, not to make you hungry, but it's just a really interesting analogy of how our sort of traditional model of building tests, of thinking on a test-by-test basis, is moving more and more to thinking about how thinking on an item-by-item basis. So going through the quality process, for example, on each item, from pre-testing or developing that and pre-testing it, that whole quality assurance process. When I then build a test, it's a bit like building a selection box. I'm making judgments as to how each of those items could come together and form a test. Now that's all well and good. What does that actually mean? Well, the example is shown in my boxes on the right, so that I've got some items and they've been tagged with metadata. In this case, just some really simple examples around a particular part that an item in my bank belongs to, thinking about the difficulty of each item and about the topics. Now, we're quite used to adaptive testing. It's been around for a long time. I think Schmidt mentioned, it was John mentioned earlier, around in the future, then actually, well, at the moment, we're very reliant on computers having to mark items like this before they can use in adaptive tests. In the future, you'd expect to see more human-marked or traditionally human-marked tests being human-marked items being used in adaptive tests. And all of that comes together in making the opportunity of more efficient testing. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm not going to test you on this algorithm. I can see you getting excited. Don't. But what this is doing is just a very simple adaptive algorithm of building a test. And actually, there's a route out here that actually, if after you've tested a while, it will say, actually, we've determined that this candidate's working at this particular level, therefore we can finish the test early. What does that mean? Well, it's meant a more enjoyable experience for the candidate. They have items that are more relevant, more accessible to them. And it's also meant the test finished early. So it's reduced the length of time that the test centre's been used, and potentially it's reduced the cost of delivering that test as well. If you like this sort of thing, I'll happily go through that with you later on. The fourth area that I want to pick up on, just before I hand over to Adam, is just thinking around collaboration. And we might not think of collaboration much as being a term that you relate when we think about assessment. But of course, we're looking at very different areas of assessment here, from formative to summative. And the idea of building in the opportunity for collaboration goes back to what I was speaking about right at the start, with that changing landscape of learning. That point where we expect, or students expect, to have much more a dynamic interaction with their tutors. What we're showing on screen here is an example of a proof of concept that RM's put together that John Bleasdale is going to talk a little bit more about later this afternoon. This is actually using another Microsoft API in this case. So we've fed the audio of a language speaking test in. And it's provided as a return a transcription of the audio from the test. And then down here, we've started to add some comments in, things like good pronunciation. So being able to, as a marker in this case, or as a tutor, a lecturer, can start to become more accurate in the results that I'm feeding back. And how this might then develop is to improve the feedback loop with candidates. And maybe you get to a point actually where we've got almost like a conversation going on. Now, we're used to seeing some of that on pen and paper feedback from on tests. But looking at some of the technologies that are around today, what we're trying to do is to look at how we harness those, the good bits that are around to be able to improve the experience and be more aligned with what what candidates are expecting and what they're used to in other parts of their learning journey. So the last area that we're going to pick up, and I'm going to ask Adam if he'll come down. Go on, you have to stand up and walk. Is around relevance of tests. So Adam's just going to spend just a few minutes talking about how ICAW have moved from pen and paper tests to on screen, and some particular challenges around, and opportunities, I guess, around maintaining the relevance of assessment to your students. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Ian. Morning, everybody. Ian's given me the unenviable task of trying to talk you through our journey, and I think he's given me 8 minutes. So I'm the barrier between you and coffee, so forgive me if it goes over slightly. First of all, a little bit about who we are, the ICAW, because you may not have heard of us. Institute of Chartered Accountants, England, Wales. So we're a membership institute. We have 147,000 members in 166 countries worldwide, but most importantly, doing all sorts of different things. So accountants get involved in many different areas. Why is that important? Because when we're training accountants, it's more about the skills than the knowledge. The knowledge is a given thing. And as we start going through the journey of what we've been trying to achieve with our assessments, it'll start to unfold that is actually the most important thing. So in terms of students, we've got 27,000 odd. We're testing in 26 countries, over 200 locations. So again, not huge, but certainly big enough to pose a few challenges. What the students have to do is they have to do 3 levels of exams. The first level is knowledge-based. It's been objective testing on computers since 2007. So we've got some experience in that. The next 2 levels, which go up to a master's level, are traditional at the moment, paper-based, long-form, written reports, exams. So that sort of nature. But they're not all about exams. They're actually, more importantly, developing the skills that accountants need. And what is it accountants do? Well, they sort of verify and engender trust in data. So that's a little bit about the ICAW. So let's just run through, just starting off with what we were wanting to achieve with the project that we're about halfway through. First bullet, kind of obvious. You know, we've been doing paper-based exams now since, well, 1880, when chartered accountants were first developed. Nobody sits down and writes for 4.5 hours or 4 hours or 3.5 hours, so why not do it on computer? But interestingly, when we came up with a straw man of this for our, our key stakeholders and said, like, you know, this is what we can do, the first kickback was, not sure if our students can type. What do you do with that? That's a life skill. Go away and practice. So the demand is there. The exam is not just about regurgitating data, it's about skills. In fact, our final level exam, which will go over in 2019 to computer input, is all about skills. It's about providing a report to whoever it happens to be based on a live scenario, and they have something like 60 pages of pre-seen information to work through, and then on the day get given the questions and then have to produce the output. One of our key principles was that the exams currently are fit for purpose. So what we did not want was for technology to lead or dictate the way we set our exams. Technology is there as an enhancer to assist. Now, some of our competitors have gone down the opposite route. They've gone, right, technology, let's go to objective testing and roll it out across the world. Now, how can you assess, from my perspective, how can you assess a master's level with objective testing? So what we've said is, we've got the right exams, let's just use technology to deliver them. Now, the other sort of key principle, which is not on this slide, but is something we've come to learn more and more as we've been going through this journey, and that is that you cannot disadvantage your students by whatever method of assessment you're implementing. So the students who are moving over from the paper-based to the computer-based at the moment are seeing the same exam, albeit on screen, the same structure, they're learning the same, the content is the same. The only difference is, instead of writing, they're typing, albeit some of them can't type. But that's absolutely crucial, and it pops up in several different places as I go through. You can't disadvantage the students. And then finally, again, another point which is not on here, the nature of chartered accountancy as a profession is it is highly regulated. So some of the things that Ian has been talking about just before I came on, we would love to do, remote proctoring, but our regulators still feel that having somebody of a certain age in a room overseeing 30 students per invigilator is the way to go. Personally, I think it's not the way to go. But we've got quite a hefty piece of persuasive argument to go through. Actually, just them allowing us to go from paper to computer has taken us, well, we started this project in 2013. So it's taken us till now to prove that it's right. So what does this all involve? The sort of parts of the jigsaw and where the technology comes in. We've produced our own piece of software, which I'll just show you in a moment. And it's a kind of combination of word processing and spreadsheeting. Now, on the face of that, you'd think, why have you bothered doing that when you've got Excel and you've got Word, which already do that job? Well, it goes back to disadvantaging a student. We're not actually assessing the student's ability to use Word or Excel. We're assessing their abilities to do financial reporting, taxation, whatever it happens to be that an accountant does. If we were to give them Excel, immediately some people would have an advantage because they're better at doing Excel than others. So we produce this platform which is consistent, comparative for all. So it's dedicated to computer exam centres in the UK, that's UK and overseas, because there's, say, 26 countries. And size of the network flexes to meet demand. So our exams are session-based, which is another reason why remote proctoring poses challenges. So our high-level exams, we probably have 3,500 students sitting them at one time globally. So consequently, having dedicated computer exam centres ensures that they all have the same screens, computers, they're all secure. Hopefully, we might move that phase 2 towards on-demand. But as we currently stand, the exams are fit for purpose. Phase 2, whenever that happens to come along, we can change. And with RM's help, we've had to plumb all the bits together. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because I don't understand it. The marking and the exams and the bookings and the test centres and all that sort of thing. Underlying that, we're still using human marking, because human marking is the best way to assess skills rather than pure knowledge. Knowledge you can use with multiple choice machine marking. Just put this up as the picture of what it is we've produced. Mostly everybody finds this totally underwhelming, which is great, particularly if the students find it totally underwhelming. But there are some constraints from the students, which we'll come to. Looks like a spreadsheet. Actually, you can turn it into word processing mode if you happen to be doing written exams rather than calculation, or indeed, you can do a bit of each. So all it does is take these cells and expand them into just normal word processing. You've got your question up on the left, and you can annotate it and highlight it and do all that sort of stuff. The technology here has really helped us with the security of the exam. So we no longer have to send out suitcases full of exam papers to... I have to be careful where I say they're going, because we have some problems with shall we say, bribery. We literally have had problems where the questions have gone out and they've been opened and shared, and the worst thing would be, of course, to go on the internet. Now they're downloaded, uploaded, and only opened as the exam starts. So, and obviously once the solutions have been completed, uploaded back again, so a major advantage. So talking about the students, assuming that they can type, most of them can, one of the biggest problems we've had is actually getting them to practice. Now we're talking about, not children here, we're talking about 18 to 25-year-olds, in some cases older than that, who, for this, it's their livelihood that they're working towards. If they fail these exams, they will not become a chartered accountant, and therefore they'll have to go and find something else to do. Some of you might say, well, that's a good thing. For them, it's obviously a bit of a stressful thing. But we launched this back at the beginning of the year, so we've had 3 sessions now, 10,000 exams sat. And aside from some of the technical issues which you're always going to get with computers, One of the biggest problems we've got is simply getting the students to practice. So on our website, we've got a practice platform. Anybody can see it, anybody can go in, do questions on it. We've got webinars, we've got every single aid of helping students to do it, but they still are not practicing it. How do I know this? Because I've spoken to a number of them straight after their exams. Did you know? Nope. Did you practice? Nope. So it's a big challenge. I'm of a certain age where this sort of stuff, you learn it and you work at it. My thinking is the age group that we're looking at, digital natives, they just assume it'll be all right on the night. Stuff I've seen before, but it does pose problems. I'm sure I've overshot. Oh no, couple of minutes.
1 minute.
1 minute, okay. Well, that'll do.